You're listening to the Inbound Logistics Podcast with today's guest, Bill Heaney, Chief Commercial Officer for Odyssey Logistics. Supply chain disruption is unpredictable and ultimately unavoidable. In a market that's dealing with tariff stress, dynamic regulatory changes, and even geopolitical instability, shippers are often left guessing as to how best to stay afloat in the churn. One potential lifeboat can be the effective use of multimodal logistics. But how do you know if it's the solution that'll work for you? Bill Heaney of Odyssey Logistics joins us to talk about what shippers should know to tackle tomorrow's challenges today. Joining me today on the Inbound Logistics Podcast, I have Bill Heaney, Chief Commercial Officer at Odyssey Logistics. Bill, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity.
Looking forward to speaking with you. Bill, do me a favor, though. Give us a quick introduction to yourself and what you're doing there at Odyssey Logistics, if you could.
Sure. I joined Odyssey about a year ago, and my goal here is to really socialize and cross-sell the Odyssey brand within our 17 business units. So over the course of the last couple of years, we've been really pushing the One Odyssey, which is basically leveraging all of the business units and the strengths of Odyssey to really have that multimodal solution for our customers.
Perfect segue. We're going to be talking about multimodal logistics as a bulwark against disruption. So let's get into that. The modern supply chain is under constant unpredictable stress. We've got tariffs on everybody's mind. We've got geopolitical tensions, climate events, regulatory changes. So there's a lot of stuff that are keeping shippers guessing. From your perspective there at Odyssey, are we looking at just temporary market spikes, or should shippers be getting used to constant disruption as the new normal?
So I would say certainly tariffs are front of mind. But if you go back the last couple of years or since the start of supply chains and international shipping and whatnot, the reality is there's always been disruptions. It's just tariffs are a major disruption today. But I mean, if you think back just 3 or 4 years ago, we had COVID disruptions. We've had labor disruptions. We've had ash clouds because of volcanoes. We've had floods. We've had various things within supply chain that have caused disruption. And when you think about supply chains and the people that are involved in supply chains, we're problem solvers. And so while today the tariff is the front and center challenge that we have, I'm sure that there'll be other challenges on the horizon that will continue to challenge the importers and the domestic logistics professionals, regardless of today's challenges. There's always going to be a challenge. And the key here really is to gain greater visibility to your supply chain and try to flatten some of those spikes in the flows of your goods.
All right. So when shippers come to Odyssey for help, with all of the challenges that are out there right now, what are the top 3 questions or concerns that they bring to you? And those conversations, have they evolved over the past couple of years with everything that's gone on? What does that tell you about where the industry is headed?
The customers, the top questions that come to mind is how do they cost control? The supply chains are disrupted. There's constantly ebbs and flows in volume in how you move your goods, but ultimately it comes down to cost control. So first and foremost, cost control, and then how do you flatten out your movement of goods? Is there a way to control those peaks and valleys? That's another topic. And then to bundle it all together, how do you improve visibility? If you cannot gain visibility to your supply chain, you really can't manage your supply chain. So those are probably the top 3 questions that we are asked of our customers and the people that we engage with within the industry.
All right. Now, Odyssey's built its reputation on multimodal logistics. So let's get into that. There's sometimes confusion over what true multimodal really means. So can you break down what multimodal actually is, what it does for shippers that other strategies maybe don't? And while you're at it, can you go into some of the myths about multimodal that you find yourself having to dispel more often than not?
Sure. So in a flat environment, no disruptions, working with a provider that can provide and movement of freight on a particular lane seamlessly. It gets there on time. The ultimate goal of supply chain is truly to eliminate the peaks and valleys in how you move your goods. Now, when you talk multimodal, it is exactly what it says it is. It's moving freight using multiple modes of transportation, as well as leveraging cross dock, some temporary warehousing, things like that. Now, the reason multimodal is incredibly important, and the reason it's, you talk about the myth of multimodal, historical supply chains and the sourcing of goods was kind of set. So people were sourcing from one location using one mode of transportation. They were very comfortable with that up until there's a disruption. So as visibility is getting better within the industry, managing the inbound flows of goods, or for that matter, the outbound flow of goods, is really about pulling cost out of a supply chain and adding predictability to a supply chain. So if you think about, leveraging a full truckload, what the transit time of that full truckload is. Now, if you moved all of your goods into a facility at one time, you'd have all the freight would arrive on time, but on time really disrupts the labor, being managed in that facility. So now you created your own peak. So the key for supply chain would be to have freight flow in a manner where you can manage that business or manage that volume. So when you talk about multimodal, it's multiple speeds, it's multiple ports, it's multiple directions and lanes, etc. So there are some freight that needs to move at an expedited pace. Okay, you can use an expedited truck. If you have, and that would arrive to a facility at a certain period in time. And then there is regular truckload, which can move at maybe not an expedited pace, but the flow of goods would come maybe the following day. And then there's, moving at, if you have an ocean container coming in, cross-docking that to an expedited truck, and that could even be a faster option. Moving air freight in an even faster option. And then you have a deferred method, which would be moving it over the rail. So when you think about the inbound flows of freight into a facility, if all of your freight arrived on day one, you'd have a spike in labor to manage that business over the course of a day or two. And then the following day or the following days, you'd have a drop in volume because you'd be waiting for that next flow of freight. So if you go ahead and flatten out your supply chain by using a multimodal solution, you're now managing the flow of goods into a facility that would allow for the cutting of cost associated with labor, this associated cost with using maybe a deferred service as well as an expedited service. And so all of that kind of is managed through greater visibility. So if you know when freight needs to be at a certain location, you can now manage the modes of transportation to get that freight to arrive to that facility on time. And I say on time meaning not everything at once, but more so in a flow that is manageable. And when you manage your supply chain with an on-time mentality, that cuts cost. So you're flattening out the peaks and valleys in a supply chain, you're flattening out your costs, and then you're also flattening out your labor costs. So having a multimodal solution allows for a more steady, predictable flow of goods in and out of a facility.
Obviously, visibility is super critical in times of mass disruption. How, though, are you achieving visibility when you're managing complex multimodal networks? And are there technologies helping shippers get deeper visibility into all of their freight?
Very much so. And I would say over the course of the last couple of years, visibility is front and center. Here at Odyssey, we use a blend of tools that help our shippers build more reliable picture of their freight. We use SpotBots, for example, which can scan internal load boards, and we can go ahead and marry up, the balance of available freight as well as, bouncing that off the best cost option. So when you think about visibility, again, it's visibility to your entire supply chain, which then allows you to get more creative with your solutions and again, flatten out that overall peak and valley, which is ultimately cost in your supply chain. So if you go back to our original, our first question, we were talking about, disruptions in supply chains and tariffs and whatnot. The tariffs are costs. The cost of goods coming inbound is a challenge. How do you mitigate those costs? It really is having greater visibility in your supply chain and flattening out the actual cost points from those peaks and valleys in the supply chain.
What about resilience? Resilience is a topic that is important to shippers, particularly in markets like this. But we have to make a distinction between true resilience and just adding redundant capacity. So, how does Odyssey frame resilience, and how do you help customers build networks that can adapt intelligently without busting those budgets?
So resilience is about design. So you have to set up your supply chain prior to the chaos that ensues because of changes that happen literally on a daily basis. If you watch the news, you will see that something happens within a supply chain globally every single day, and it's quite interesting to look, because you look at the news at a different, from a different perspective now, different lens when you are within supply chain. So looking at how do we build an intentional design that can flex based upon conditional changes, and that's really balancing modes, looking at geographies, balancing carrier relationships, so the freight keeps moving. And that could be a balance of rail, it could be a balance of direct carrier contracts, it could also be a balance of leveraging brokerage as well. So you have that ability to flex up and down within a supply chain without having to establish new relationships with new partners based upon challenges that may come. So it's really designing a supply chain that allows for diversification and risk mitigation.
You mentioned those relationships, and I did hear you use the word partnership. So it sounds like Odyssey really positions itself more as a true partner rather than just a logistics provider. So when supply chains get really complicated, what does that partnership look like in practice? Are there any examples of how your approach changes the way that you solve problems for your partners?
So the partnership really starts with alignment. So we're not looking for transactional type relationships. We can start with a transactional relationship, but the purpose of what we do and how we do it, and how we leverage the overall cross sell within the one Odyssey solution, is really to understand the customer's supply chain. What are your current flows look like? What is your, what are your biggest challenges within that supply chain? Where do you see the future of your supply chain going? How do we build a lane by lane multimodal strategy that allows for that risk mitigation, that cost cutting ability, without obviously slowing down a supply chain or changing a supply chain completely? So certainly the goods need to move. They need to move in the most effective manner. But sometimes, having part of your freight moving faster and the other part of the freight moving slower will flatten out some of those peaks and valleys. So the way that we look at things and the way that we engage with our customers is more from a solutioning standpoint. We want to better understand the supply chains. We want to know all the ins and outs, even for the business that we currently don't manage. We sit and take a consultative approach to these customers, and we look at all of the modes of transportation, and then we advise. Some of the things, the entry points that we have are at a single lane level, but we also, as part of our consultative sell, we enter that customer, we give greater visibility, we align on the partnership, and then we offer up solutions above and beyond the current opportunity in hand. And that's really helping the customer understand what the risks are in their supply chain. How do we mitigate those risks and ensure that their freight moves at the appropriate speed, and mitigate some of those potential bottlenecks for disruptions that we may or may not see.
Okay, great. Speaking of not seeing, if you look ahead 3 to 5 years, let's say, what trends in regulation, tech, or customer priorities do you think will fundamentally reshape how companies design their supply chains. And what should executives be preparing for that they might not have on their radar just yet?
3 to 5 years out, depending on the politics of or geopolitics rather, where people are sourcing from, what those volume levels look like, shifts in the import process and what ports we go into. Do we nearshore? Is a popular word that's out there. Certainly, that cuts down on the supply chain as far as transit time is concerned, but it opens up customers to have to develop new relationships, new modes of transportation, and basically it could shift the way that we currently do business. Now, that being said, the most important piece to really set up now is really visibility and automation maturity within their supply chains. We have to set up exception management. We cannot manage business and volume, on a day-to-day basis. It needs to be something that we're proactive with. How do we build out a supply chain through visibility and exception management to go ahead and predict where there's going to be challenges, what POs or shipments need to be moved at an expedited pace, which ones can we slow down? Just looking at overall supply chains and risk mitigation. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge in the coming years, is really risk mitigation due to changes in the overall flows of freight. And with that, having adopting a multimodal option. I think the historical flows of goods will change. We're diversifying, or I imagine others will be diversifying from China. Historically, they were very heavily weighted towards China. There's a shift to Southeast Asia. There's a shift to Mexico. So those changes certainly will impact where your freight is going to. And then once it reaches here stateside, the bigger question is, do you have the partners to partner with to ensure that there is capacity, and that you have a steady flow of those goods? And that's really where the multimodal solution comes in. Do you have a partner that has a cross dock? Do you have a partner that has a warehouse? Do you have a partner that has full truckload as well as LTL partners to work with to ensure that you do have that capacity? Do you have a partner that has a rail solution? And so all of these topics really will be front and center in the coming weeks, coming months, coming years for anybody that's leading or building a supply chain.
All right, well, let's stay there then. For our listeners who are supply chain executives, they're evaluating their current networks and partnerships. You touched on a few questions. What's maybe the key question that they should be asking themselves right now to ensure that they are building for tomorrow's challenges and not kind of putting a Band-Aid on today's problems?
I'd say, the couple questions is, do you have a partner that has real-time visibility and exception management? I would say that, do you have diversification within your full truckload, your LTL, your rail, your ocean, any kind of, specialized providers? Do you have diversification? That's great that you have a strong partnership in one region, but what happens if there's a shift in where that freight originates? Do you have a national partner that can flex based upon, the overall market conditions and where freight is originating? Can you execute on a multimodal move and cleanly? Is that something where, we can talk about a multimodal solution, but does a partner have expertise in that? Is it seamless? Do you have visibility that will give you, a picture of where the freight is at all times? The handoffs from one mode of transportation to the next. Is there flexibility in overall price? And when I say price, I hate talking about price. It's more about cost. But do you have the right service and the speed and also sustainability? I mean, that is still very much front and center for the logistics industry. Do you have a sustainability option that will ensure that we are not we're bettering the planet? So do those partners truly have that mix? So those are the questions that really need to be asked of supply chain executives.
Excellent, important questions. Let's Send our audience somewhere where they can check in on all of that information and ask the right questions. So where can I send them?
I would send them to odysseylogistics.com, and you'll see on there all the modes of transportation we have, as well as our overall strategy from a supply chain perspective.
Perfect. That link will be in the show notes. Bill Heaney, thank you so much for all of that information. Guys out there that are looking for some solutions, head over to odysseylogistics.com. Best of luck to you, and best of luck to Odyssey Logistics.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Inbound Logistics Magazine is the information leader in supply chain and logistics management. Start your free print and digital subscription today by visiting bit.ly/getil. That's bit.ly/get_IL and stay ahead of the 3PL game.
The Inbound Logistics Podcast is a production of Inbound Logistics Magazine. For the most in-depth information around logistics, transportation, and supply chain practices, get your free print and digital subscription at inboundlogistics.com/subscribe. Connect with us via LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube for the most current developments in the industry. If you'd like to leave us some feedback or have a topic you'd like to see covered in a future episode, call our dialogue line at 888-878-3247 or leave us an email at podcast@inboundlogistics.com. I'm your host, Jeff Vita. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time here on the Inbound Logistics Podcast.